So yeah, basically, I mentioned a bit before about the pulley with the up and over rig, and basically, yeah, it's a rig that I've found has been useful fishing over rough ground. So over Cardiff foreshore, when basically the first 50 yards or so is really broken and heavy rock and rubble. There isn't really much choice than you've just got to get it in, and you've got to have the weight up out of the way in order to reel in. I've even found, say, with like a 3 hook flapper and things like that, yeah, they do say that a big hook and a big bait can catch big fish, and a small hook can catch small fish, but also big fish. If you're using a 3 hook flapper and you end up getting a big fish on the top hook, that can really lead to some difficulties bringing in your tackle. Of course, it's good to have like a rotten bottom, and then that will actually you can break off, but it's still like an element of risk. I've used the Portsmouth rig, the loop rig as well, the 2 hook, which obviously there's the advantage then you've got 2 hooks. And a great thing about it is you've got that streamlined bait when you're casting, because you've got both of your baits relatively close to the weight. But in my experience, I've found that, I don't know, quite often they tangle, maybe 1 in 4 times, or a little bit more often than that. The 2 snuds end up getting caught and tangling when I've reeled them in. So it's kind of dissuaded me from those. But it may be that I'm making a bit of a risk, or doing something wrong. But on top of that, the 2 hook loop rig, if you catch something with the top snud and you get a big fish on that, you really are stuck with your bottom. So for a rough ground rig, it seems as if your only real ways to go are to have a pulley rig or to have an up and over rig. And there aren't really any options for a rough ground rig, truly speaking, in which you can have 2 hooks. So this method, although it isn't perfect, perhaps it can be applied to a certain number of conditions. And I've found that it has been quite kind of effective and successful. I still need to catch a good few fish with it, but yeah, it works well, and yeah, it'll be good to see what you think of it, and to see if the actual idea has got mileage. So I'll just show you the actual rig itself. I'll get the weight on now. So starting off, there's a pulley. And the pulley is 3 foot. At the top, start off with a small hook, 3 foot pulley, 3'6" I think I've measured. So then I've got up here, I've got the beads, and I use a little stop knot so that it effectively acts as a paternoster, which is what the Bandit Fishing Boys showed. So further down then, there's a clip. I use one of those Gemini clips, but with the extended piece, if you can see that. There we are, I use one of these, hook on. So that's the pulley done. Then moving on to the up and over. So I've got here 12 inches of rig line, call it. I've gone for orange, just so that you can help see it. I should have thought of that in the first part of the video as well, first part of the making the rig. So I've got those 12 inches, and then another little stop here, just so that when it pulls, then I've got a good chance of hooking the fish naturally. I've got 2 foot precisely of hook length. So I don't know if you can see that, but I've got, yeah, so that 12 inches, and then go into 2 foot of hook length there. So I've effectively got a running ledger rig, or an up and over, with a foot sliding, and then 2 foot here. So this hook length can hook onto the Gemini, So I've got two Geminis clipped. The bottom Gemini is for the up and over. The top Gemini is for the pulley rig. And clip down, and then I should have checked that. My lengths are just slightly out. There we go. So hooked on. I've also got a bit of rotten bottom, which is fairly short. So that is, I don't know, just a few inches, and it needs to be, because almost if you do the maths with this, you've got your 3 foot that pulls out of the way, which can pull the majority of this. So I'll just demonstrate how it works. So I've got that clipped on a stand, just about okay for heights. That's lucky. And then this 3 foot trace on that top. Here we are. So here's the rig. Let's see how far down we can get it. Hopefully you can see it there. So got the pulley here, and if a fish gets that, it will pull the bait stop and then pull this up out of the way. So I've then got almost 6 foot. If you get a decent sized fish on your pulley, you've got 6 foot pulling out. So if I release the up and over, you've got your 1 foot of rig body and your 2 foot of hook length, which makes 3 foot, and the weight on it. But if you have a big fish on this pulley section, it is actually 6 foot long because you've got a 3 foot pulley. So what happens is the weight, yes, is still dangling by the length of the hook length, the rig length and the rotten bottom, but that's about 18 inches, call it 12 inches of rig body, and 6 inches or go even less of rotten bottom. The other thing, the great thing about it is if you haven't hooked a fish on this, then basically you've just got to have a bit of weight, a bit of bait on there, and it's just going to be trailing along. So when you're reeling in, yeah, it's not ideal that you've got that weight that's a foot below, but if you've got a decent fish, then it's going to be okay. It's going to pull things out of the way, basically. So if we reverse things, and if you hook a fish on the bottom rig, the up and over, and not the top, you're going to end up with, let's try and move this, you're going to end up with 3 foot with a relatively small bait here, trailing, and then you've got 3 foot of rig body, plus the 1 foot of rig body from the up and over, and the 2 foot of your up and over pulling. So you've got this weight here once again, but because the larger fish is on the up and over, it's still up out of the way. So you have actually got an effective 2 hook method for fishing over rough ground. It's not perfect because the weight is out of the way, but it's a little bit clunky in terms of sometimes there's 12 inches that it's causing issue. And another kind of slight issue with the rig, I would say, is you need your pulley rig, you need that top hook of the pulley rig to be like a small hook with a relatively small bait, I found. Because if you go having, say, like a squid on here, when you're casting, you've got your weight, which is obviously going to be rotten bottomed up. You've got your hook here on that bait clip, and you've got your, heavier bait just below. excuse me a minute, heavier weight just below. You've got like a heavy bait here, just above your lead. You've got 12 inches, and then you've got the bait here. I've found that really, if you have like a heavy bait here and there, it kind of like loses, it wobbles a bit in the cast, and that can end up causing it to release as well, and it's almost not worth it then. So unfortunately, you do have to have kind of a smaller rig on the pulley, and I probably would have preferred that to be a larger bait for the rays and stuff, because you've got that 3 foot, which is good for when rays come along. But you know, it can't be perfect, and if you are kind of looking for a solution to fish multiple hooks, then probably, you know, maybe it's just better off going for other rigs. But over rough ground, if you want smaller hooks as well, the top rig or the top snood can be that smaller hook for like a smaller fish, and who knows, you can afford to catch a bigger one. But the bottom, then you can afford to have a pennel set up with your circle. The other disadvantage really is that you've only really got 2 foot trailing away on this, which is plenty really. And obviously there's that rotten bottom as well, which causes a bit of distance for any rays that might get caught up in that part of the rig. But it's another kind of slight factor to bear in mind. So it is a very niche rig really. And if you want to just target rays, then I would have probably said just using the straight, you know, up and over or a pulley is better. However, I think this rig does has its places in that it does allow you to fish rotten ground, rough ground, big boulders and things, such as what we have like over the foreshore, and have multiple hooks, so you can fish in 2 different, say, water columns, and vary your baits as well. I just wanted to add a bit in terms of how I explained it, so I know it wasn't fully clear. Yeah, but just to say, basically, when, say, if you've got your up and over and then you have a fish on this, it's pulling, so you've got that 3 foot of the rig body, 2 foot up and over snood, 1 foot of the up and over rig body, and then this pulley released. You've got, say, a hook on here and a bit of bait trailing, so it's not ideal, because you have got 3 foot of line trailing. That could get caught in some weed or on a rock, and that could cause you some difficulty. A way of overcoming it would be to, say, just use a circle here, so it's got less chance of getting caught in anything. But one of the things I've found is that really, say if you've got like a light bait and you're reeling in, this kind of like, with the motion of reeling in, it almost goes quite close to the surface. So your only key issue I found has been like seaweed and stuff. It's not really along the bottom, it's not weighted. So yeah, there is 3 foot trailing, and that could go anywhere and cause all kinds of hassle. But I found it better than, say, with a loop rig, when you've got, you know, that it's totally fixed. So whatever happens, if you get a fish on your top hook, you've got, you know, 2 foot of line with a weight at the bottom, and it's the weight that I find is what causes the issue. Whereas a bit of bait, you know, on a hook is far less of an issue, especially if there's motion as you're retrieving the fish. This goes towards the surface, and if you're really lucky and you've got a good rate of retrieve, then it's almost on the surface. But obviously you can overcome it with a circle. If we reverse it and get a fish on the pulley, this pulls right the way up. I should, hopefully you can imagine what's happening here as it turns. So then you've got the weight out of the way, and then you have still got 2 foot of hook length, and that's trailing. But once again, in comparison to the fish, when you're at those, like, say, last 30 or 40 yards, when you're reeling that fish in, or the last 20 yards, where, you know, you've got that rubble and you're really in close, your weight is likely to be up out of the water, or, you know, you've got, like, it's near the surface. And the same with this, with, you know, a bit of squid on here, a fairly light bait, it's going to be, you know, at least it's not trailing. So it's not perfect in that respect, but I think it's better than a loop rig for rough ground fishing with multiple. And that's just the reason that I think behind it. All right, cheers.